Meet Yu Young-cho, one of South Korea's most infamous serial killers. Between 2003 and 2004, he terrorized a city, captivated the national press, and left the police reluctant to acknowledge the presence of a serial killer in their midst. His weapon of choice was a homemade hammer, with which he embarked on a blood-soaked reign of terror before finally being brought to justice in a case full of shocking twists and turns. However, Yu Young-chul was no stranger to breaking the law. Before becoming a cold-hearted killer, he already had a disturbing rap sheet and a history of prison time. Let's delve into the unsettling world of the Korean man responsible for the deaths of 26 people, also known as the Raincoat Killer. In 2004, South Korea witnessed a disturbing pattern. The owner of several massage parlors in Seoul noticed that some of the girls in his employ were going missing. These working girls, living isolated lives, went unnoticed by family and friends, making them vulnerable targets. The alarm was finally raised when the massage parlor owner received a call from a man seeking the services of one of the missing girls. This seemingly innocuous call came from the phone of one of the missing girls herself. An operation was launched to deceive the caller into meeting a girl set up by the police. He walked straight into their trap, and Yu Young-chul was swiftly taken into custody. What the police initially believed to be a case of kidnapping and human trafficking would soon unravel as one of the most horrific killing sprees ever documented. Shockingly, during questioning, Yu admitted to taking the lives of over 20 people, most of whom were either prostitutes or elderly and wealthy victims. He even led the police to the burial sites of these victims. What drives someone to commit such heinous acts against others? This story begins when Yu was just a child, and his upbringing was marked by tragedy, setting in motion a series of events that would eventually lead him down the path of murder. Yu Young-chul was born into poverty in 1970 in Gochang, South Korea. He had a difficult early life, with other kids at school mocking him for his family's lower caste status. As some of his victims were wealthy, it's believed that his social status as a child in poverty played a role in his eventual hatred for those who were more privileged. Furthermore, Yu and his siblings were abandoned by their mother early in life, left at their grandmother's home with no return. Their father later took over their care and moved them into a new home with their stepmother, but this was no happy family life. The stepmother was abusive towards the children. Tragedy struck when Yu's father passed away in a traffic accident in 1985, leaving him and his family devastated. Despite these hardships, Yu had a real opportunity to turn his life around and escape poverty. He decided that he needed to work hard and succeed in life. However, after applying to art school, he suffered another personal setback when the school rejected him. By 1988, he eventually settled for a technical school that accepted him with his qualifications. But instead of studying diligently, he found a quick way to make money through a life of crime. However, it seemed that crime wasn't Yu's strong suit. At just 18 years old, he was caught stealing from a wealthy neighbor. As a result, he was sent to a juvenile detention center. His punishment didn't stop there, as he could no longer attend the technical school, and he failed his classes, eventually flunking the course. From this point, his criminal activities escalated rapidly. He started stealing more valuable items, cash, and eventually progressed to car theft. In a pattern that would become familiar, he was apprehended again in 1991 after stealing from his landlord, who happened to be his very own victim. This time, he faced prison, where he spent 10 months contemplating his actions. Despite his questionable record, his girlfriend, who worked as a masseuse, agreed to become his wife, and they had a son together. Instead of enjoying family life, Yu returned to his criminal ways, particularly stealing. Later, he was caught stealing a car, resulting in another 8 months behind bars. It was during his release that he was diagnosed with epilepsy, which he would later use to his advantage. Yu was no stranger to breaking the law for his own needs, with his record mainly consisting of theft or similar crimes that didn't cause significant harm to others, except perhaps insurance companies. However, he took a dark turn when he was arrested for selling illegal pornography. leading to a 2-year prison sentence. Upon his release, he immediately reoffended and returned to a life behind bars, serving an additional 3 years. Throughout this tumultuous journey, his wife stood by his side, raising their son, while he continued to steal and repeatedly get caught by the police. She reached her breaking point in the year 2000 when he was found guilty of assaulting a 15-year-old girl and sentenced to another 3.5 years in prison. This prompted his wife to file for divorce, citing abuse and alcohol-related problems. Upon his release in 2003, Yu embarked on a new path of depravity that would send shockwaves around the world and plunge a city into fear. During his time in prison, he had developed an admiration for a killer named Zhongdu Yang, who took the lives of 9 people between 1999 and 2000. Each of Yang's victims were wealthy, something that Yu seemed to relate to. His hatred for those with money had escalated, viewing them as the root of his problems. He also developed a hatred for women after his divorce, leading his mind down a dark and dangerous path inspired by his idol Yang. Later, he quoted that women should not be, and the rich should know what they have done, perhaps a stark warning of the terrors yet to come. Leaving behind his mother's home, he was allowed access to his son, but these visitations would take a much more sinister turn. Yu Yangchul had planned to take revenge on his wife in the cruelest way. He intended to take her life and then his son's during these visitations. The perfect opportunity for him to carry out this horrifying act. He later admitted that he could not bring himself to commit such an act due to some moral stance. Thankfully, his wife and child survived this sadistic maniac. Unfortunately, he would not have such hesitation when he found his next target, the wealthy. In preparation, Yu needed to practice his killing, and he knew exactly how to go about it. He crafted his own weapon, fashioning a hammer with enough force to kill. He replaced its long handle with a shorter one, customized the grip to his own needs, and equipped himself with a knife and gloves. With these tools, he had everything needed to carry out what he called his revenge. To test his newfound weapon, he began taking stray dogs to secluded woodlands and would then beat them to death in a frenzied and remorseless attack. Many serial killers progress this way, often beginning with animals before moving on to human victims. Yu was no exception, and before long, he would start acting out his revenge on those he hated the most. On September 24, 2003, less than 2 weeks after being released from prison, Yu put his plan into action. He targeted the wealthy neighborhood of Sinsadong. Without warning, he burst into the home of his first victim, Lee Yuk-soo, a retired professor in his 70s who lived with his wife, Yeon Ok. Around 10 a.m., Yu mercilessly stabbed Mr. Lee in the neck before turning on his wife. She was bludgeoned with a hammer until Yu returned to Mr. Lee to finish him off. Astonishingly, after this brutal act, he cleaned up and left. He had to break back into the house because he had left behind his knife. He hoped that making the scene look like a robbery gone wrong might distract investigators. However, in yet another error, he trashed the house without actually stealing anything, raising a red flag for the police. They also discovered shoe prints at the scene that would soon become very familiar. Within weeks, Yu struck again on October 9, 2003 in Guidong, following the same pattern. He broke into the home of another wealthy household around mid-morning. After encountering 85-year-old Mo Kang, he committed a depraved act before being interrupted by the homeowner's wife. He forced her into the lounge and asked her to bow her head, presumably for some kind of execution. She refused and told him that her son and husband were home. In response, he unleashed his rage and claimed another victim. Next, he targeted her son, a person with disabilities, which makes this case even more shocking. He forced her son to kneel down and repeatedly struck him with a hammer until the life drained from him. In just minutes, Yu Yangchul claimed 3 victims, although it could have been 4 if the husband had been home. It remains unclear whether the homeowner's wife lied about his presence to try and scare the intruder away or genuinely believed he was home. Unfortunately, the husband would later discover the bodies in what must have been a heart-wrenching scene. The same footprints from the previous crime scene appeared here, providing police with a lead. Yu wasn't finished yet, this time targeting Samsung Dong. He broke into a house with a single resident, Yu Junhee, a 69-year-old mother. He forced her into the bathroom and callously beat her, displaying a terrifying disregard for human life. Her son discovered her still alive, but, despite the efforts of paramedics, she did not survive the ordeal, resulting in another tragic and senseless loss of an innocent life. The media began to notice the proximity of the murders, asking questions about their potential connection due to the shared footprints at several crime scenes and the similarities in the victims' deaths. While it became increasingly evident that there was a link, the police denied it to avoid causing panic among the public. Just a few weeks later, on November 18, 2003, Yu struck again, this time in the province of Dong. He broke into a house and confronted the housekeeper. He brandished his knife and forced her to show him to the master bedroom, where the 87-year-old homeowner, Kim Jong-suk, was located. However, a new challenge presented itself. The homeowner's son was in the room, but he was only a baby. As Yu lunged at the homeowner with his hammer, the housekeeper grabbed the 1-year-old and attempted to flee. She must have feared the worst as Yu took the baby and wrapped him in a blanket. Surprisingly, instead of harming the baby, he left him in another room, wrapped up, so that his cries could be heard by the neighbors. Returning to the bedroom with unfinished business, Yu directed his hatred toward the housekeeper, who tragically did not survive the attack. Once again, Yu made a critical mistake by leaving behind his DNA, while trashing the property in an attempt to make it look like a botched robbery. He then committed a heinous act to hide the evidence of his blood. He set fire to the house, with the baby still inside. Yu watched from a safe distance as the house burned. Miraculously, the baby was later discovered alive by a family member. The blaze had destroyed the bodies and the master bedroom, leaving most of the house untouched. When police checked the home's security cameras, they finally caught a glimpse of South Korea's newest serial killer. He was wearing a sweater he found inside the house to cover the blood on his own clothing. While he is seen only from the back, it at least gave investigators something to work with, along with yet another set of shoe prints linked to other crime scenes. Yu then changed his pattern, no longer targeting the older, wealthy residents of the city. If he had continued his familiar pattern, the police might have caught him sooner. Instead, he had other ideas in mind and needed a change of scenery that eventually led him to his next inevitable victim. He acquired a police officer's uniform and began extorting money from escorts working around the red light district. Surprisingly, he was very skilled at this newfound illegal profession and eventually raised enough cash to move into an apartment where he continued his reckless and indulgent lifestyle. Much like the wealthy had triggered Yu's hatred, he soon developed a new hatred for women after dating an escort, whom he later proposed to. However, when she discovered his previous marriage and shady past, she left him, and they never spoke again. This rejection seemed to be the tipping point for Yu, and he sought revenge. On March 16, 2004, after a short pause in his killing streak, he returned to the streets with only one thing in mind. Posing as a police officer once again, he ordered an escort and pretended to arrest her. He took her back to his apartment, where death awaited her. It was an agonizing end to her life and a grim testament to the sadistic nature of Yu Young-chul. To make matters even more twisted, it's reported that he kicked the girl's head and hung it up to drain her blood. Realizing his third-floor apartment was unsuitable for removing the body, he dismembered her into several pieces and buried them in grocery bags behind Sogong University. He marked the spot where he buried the girl's remains with a bottle cap, not as a marker for admiring his handiwork, but to avoid using the same spot for his next victims. Yu broke his pattern with his next victim, who was neither wealthy nor an escort. He was, in fact, a street vendor named An Ji-sun. After purchasing fake Viagra that didn't work, Yu put on his police uniform and arrested the vendor for breaking pharmaceutical laws. Using the vendor's own van, he drove them both to a nearby location. If On was suspicious of being taken away in his own vehicle, he didn't have much time to act on it. You stabbed him in the head and neck, and in the struggle to survive, On was injured. You retaliated with his hammer in a frenzied attack, killing On with over 20 blows to the head. Traces of Yu's blood were found in the victim's van, leaving him with no choice but to destroy the evidence by burning the van along with the body and the perpetrator's DNA in a nearby car park. He targeted the escorts of the red light district once more and embarked on a short but shocking killing spree, taking many more lives and leaving numerous families grieving for their loved ones, all slain by an unremorseful psychopath. This time, he would call escorts to his apartment, bludgeon them one by one, and then dismember them before burying their body parts, each marked with a bottle cap to avoid digging in the same spot again. He followed this pattern in his next 9 murders. However, one massage parlor owner began to notice the strange disappearances. Yu was not the best at planning ahead, which had led to many of the mistakes he had made in the past, and this would eventually lead to his downfall. Many of the victims worked at parlors owned by the same man, and he noticed a girl had gone missing who had left to see a client. As he inquired at other parlors, he realized that something was very wrong when a list of missing escorts grew. It was also discovered that the same phone number had booked girls at 2 different parlors, and both had gone missing. The phone number used belonged to one of the missing girls. Fearing the worst, the parlor owner called the police. Together with the police, they devised a plan to snare the culprit. They assumed the girls were being kidnapped. Sure enough, the very same phone number called back, and the plan was put into action. The escorts arrived at the agreed meeting point, and just when it looked like they might have their suspect, you called the girl back and cancelled the appointment, citing that the girl was too tall. This makes sense when you consider the way you killed many of his victims. He often made them kneel, displaying signs that he liked them to be submissive, much like how he chose his targets, thinking they would be easier to overpower, such as unsuspecting escorts, the elderly, or the frail. Being confronted with a tall girl would have made him feel less in control, and so he called it off at the last minute. It wouldn't take long before they found the ideal girl to play the part, and you took the bait perfectly. Before you could act, he was surrounded by the police. They found him desperately chewing something, which turned out to be the calling cards of several escorts and his own phone, which matched the phone the police were looking for. However, when they got the suspected kidnapper into an interrogation room, what he revealed to them was way beyond anything they could have ever expected. You were taken to the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency, where he was questioned about what he had done with the girls. He denied kidnapping and selling them, but admitted to the murders he had committed in the wealthy community. The police were unsure about the confession and didn't believe him right away, which shocked the detectives into action. He told them that he had killed over 20 people, starting with a murder in Sinsadong and finishing with the murder of an escort just days before his arrest. Whether you fully planned his next move is unclear, but using his epilepsy to his advantage, he faked a seizure. Astonishingly, officers actually released him from his handcuffs and left him alone with the door wide open, believing he was incapacitated. This failure of proper care allowed you to escape, where he made his way home and began to destroy evidence. It's strange how he would admit to the murders only to try and destroy evidence of them, but it's clear that this individual is extremely unhinged and perhaps not thinking straight. He was spotted by a police officer within 12 hours of his escape, and this time there would be no escape. Although he changed his story several times, he did claim to have eaten the organs of several of his victims. This was never proven for sure, but some of his victims were found to be missing organs, so this sordid, sick claim may just be true. You agreed to take police to the bodies of his victims, and it was during this time that he earned the nickname the Raincoat Killer. The term was used more internationally than in South Korea. The reason was that he was paraded around the sites where he had hidden the bodies, and his identity was disguised by wearing a large yellow raincoat. The term was born from the media, and although it was irrelevant to the actual murders, the name stuck, and the Raincoat Killer became known across the world. The reality is that the police departments working on the case were criticized for the way it was handled. Were it not for the massage parlor owners, they may have never caught their man, who is reported as saying he would have continued until he was stopped. Thankfully, he was now in custody and would face trial for his crimes. During the trial, he tried to attack the judge and attempted suicide while in custody, causing unnecessary delays. Then, while back in court, he tried to attack a spectator and showed no remorse towards the families of those he had killed. Eventually, the inevitable guilty verdict was reached, and this cold-blooded killer would face the maximum penalty. He currently sits on death row, as an execution has not taken place in South Korea since 1997. In fact, right up until this case made the press, the public mood was near to abolishing capital punishment. This series of grisly murders and total disregard for human life angered the country, and the penalty remains in South Korea, even if many may never see an execution. This case sent shockwaves across South Korea and remains one of the worst, if not the most disorganized series of murders to have ever happened. Even if young Chol never faces an execution, we can rest easier knowing he will spend the rest of his natural life inside a prison cell. Feel free to share your thoughts on this case in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on the world's most disturbing crimes. Thank you.